Hey, it's Don, the Auction Professor. Today we're going to talk about reel-to-reel recordings, actually. They're kind of like tapes, the predecessor for tapes, regular standard cassette tapes. They used to be used in studios only, but they had moved into the actual home market use as well, too. But we're going to talk about the actual recorded material, not the actual players, but the recorded material right now. Okay, so now we're going to talk about reel-to-reels today. Now, I'm not going to talk about the actual players. There's so much involved in those. I buy them broken, and there's all kinds of things you can do. Some reel-to-reel players go up to $10,000 a piece. Average ones are a couple $100. A decent average one's $4 or $5. I'm not going to go into that today because there's just, again, too much. I'm going to go into what I see the most of. It's rare to run into the players themselves that are any good. Last one I got needed parts, and it was easier for me to tear it apart, and I made hundreds of dollars of profit by selling the individual pieces, like the hubs that hold the reels down. Sometimes you get 40, 50 bucks, and just parts in general is what we usually do with them. I'll buy them broken and then just tear them apart. So the number one thing I usually look for are the reel-to-reels. These are the same size, basically, as a box of 45 records, like a album that would be in a box form. It's basically the same size. They're like 8 inches across or somewhere in that range. Now, there's different varieties of these. Just like records, there's 16 speed, 33, 45, and 78 speeds. Now, on reel-to-reels, there's IPS. Now, IPS is like the speed of it. It's inches per second. There's 3 basic ones that I see. There might be another one, but these are the only ones I've ever run into. There's 3 3/4 inches per second. There's 7.5 or 7.5 inches per second. And then there's 15 inches per second. The most common I see is 7.5. The next is 3.34, and 15 are extremely scarce and always go for a lot of money, depending on the music. But almost all of them sell for good money, the 15 IPS. There's differences in size of the reels. There's difference in length of the reels. Again, the common ones are these 7.5s. It holds an LP on it. Some of them hold a double. It just depends. So this is the first one here. My wife has this album, so I know the album. My wife's a big David Bowie fan. She's probably got most of his pinups. Now, you got to know something about music in general to know what to get for the most part. Reel-to-reels, the ones that sell the most and the highest, Elvis, rock from the 60s and 70s, and then like soul. Those are like some of the top ones. I also look for classical. Now, classical can sell for a ton of money. You get the right one, even on a record, on an LP. Some of those I've sold for hundreds of dollars. So this is one area where classical I will buy no matter what, just because I know I'm going to get at least 5, 10, 15, 20 bucks. Get these in big bulk lots if you're lucky. That's my best guess on these for you. I get them from like auctions, estate sales, on Craigslist occasionally I'll look. Not rarely these days, but they do show up. I do run into these quite a lot. If there's a music collection for sale, I'll look. I'll go to flea markets. You'll run into these at antique malls even, believe it or not. So church sales even. I've bought some at church sales. So this is a perfect example. Now I usually pay a couple bucks. Sometimes I spent 5 or 10 on a single reel-to-reel. Now you've got to look these up again, and you're not going to find every one. You can look for these on PopPsych. You will find them on PopPsych and Discogs, just depending on who's selling them. There's a lot of sellers that won't cross-list these on other sites. I do. I don't care if there's not a specific spot to put these. I've even had them on Amazon and sold some on Amazon too. So anyway, the condition on this one's really good. And this is the typical what you see. Some of them have clear labels, but many have, the earlier ones, just have a solid label like this. You can see the film, the tape itself, and then there'll be a sticker on the reel. Even blank metal reels will sell. Blank, unrecorded, sealed reel sell. The whole works sells. But we're going to touch on all those in just a minute here. This one went for $721. Standard 4-track. Now there's 4-track, there's 2-track, there's stereo, there's mono. There's a lot to this. Basically, you see a rock one that's a reel-to-reel, nab it up until you know for sure and look it up. If it's cheap enough, $1 or $2, you can't go wrong. And most any reel-to-reels are worth at least $5. That's my personal experience. I don't think I've ever sold any less, unless it was just some junked out ones, and then I just lotted them together and still made a profit on them. So reel-to-reels are killer. Led Zeppelin's on that list. Obviously, it's early rock, garage rock. Nice selection. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I think that's what House is the Holy. Yeah, House is the Holy. I've got every Led Zeppelin one. I actually have the box set that I bought at an auction for $5, and I actually just burned them all and copied them into the system. I use digital everything, so I don't usually keep most things like this. If it's a record and there's no CD version of it available, I'll just rip a track of it, clean it up in one of the programs I have, and then just keep that. I do collect music. I do sell some recorded music that has dead patents and things like that too. I've made money on that. Maybe in the future I'll touch on it a little bit, but I have connections after working at Disney. A friend works at Fox and things like that. So, and there's some overseas buyers that I do to, like Japan and things, that will buy early 78s that have been recorded and cleaned up. They have to be cleaned up. That's why, certain people like us will have, laser players and things like that for records. So just keep that in mind. So they cost a ton, but if you've got the market and the ability and knowledge and connections, it's worth it for some people. But perfect example here. You can see they're not all filled up. It just depends on the length and such forth on them. Doubles and such forth will take up more actual tapes. So anyway, $750 for this one. These, I would have probably sold separately. I would personally do it that way. They would have probably cranked out another $100-$150 on them separately. It may have taken another week or two, but they would have been gone. Paul McCartney, and then Hard Day's Night and mono. Mono, if you're not aware, sometimes the mono versions of even records sell for more than the stereo, because the mono is the only version that was originally released. The stereo was released later on, so the mono is the first pressing. It's kind of like a book. The stereo may be a second edition or second pressing, like in a book-wise. You have first, second, third editions. The first edition on some, as I said, are mono, and those are the ones that are worth more than the stereo. So some people can't get that across, and they think that's crazy, but that's literally how it is. Perfect example here, $708. Again, Beatles, that's one of the top ones I sell. If I get a Beatles, they go separately. I would have sold these separately. It just depends on if someone's willing to mess with it. I always sell them separately. These kind. Now, again, I do bulk stuff up, so... Another one of Led Zeppelin. It's basically the same lot. I think there is a couple other ones available, if I'm not mistaken. I'm almost sure I've had Physical Graffiti once on a reel-to-reel, and it's worth some money. But this gives you an idea here on what shows up. Usually they'll be collectors. These were expensive even back then. So, to have these, they were high-end. They didn't make anywhere near as many reel-to-reels, and that's why they're so expensive. People messed them up. They taped over them. It's like a cassette tape. You can tape over these. This one, $677.96. You can see the horrendous price on some of these, so keep that in mind. Again, as I said, 7.5 IPS, that's 7.5 inches per second. That's how it feeds through the machine. Every second, 7.5 inches of this tape runs through the player. So that's just on a 15 inches per second runs through the player on some versions, and then 3.34 runs. And again, double track, quad track, you will see quadrophonic just like you do in records. Those are always worth more. I've pulled out a couple in here too. There's no rocket science to this. You get something that's name brand, that the performer, it's usually worth some money. Now, if this was just a record for Rolling Stones, they made millions of them, it's not worth very much money. But reel-to-reel is totally different. These are for audiophiles back in the day, and many studios and radio stations would have had these too. So they do show up. 709, 62 bids. This might be an area that I might list as an auction on some of these as well, too. There's few categories that I do, but reel-to-reels are strange. One can sell one week for $200 or $300. Someone the next week can really want it bad, and it could go up to $500, $600, $700, the same one that just sold the week before. So anyway, I wouldn't recommend trying to buy them and hope that they go up, because there's just no rhyme or logic to them. Now, blank material. I buy these occasionally. Once or twice a year, I'll run into somebody that are garage sale, estate sale, or an auction of a closing down business. And it doesn't have to be a music-related business for these to show up. Some companies did, they recorded like the background noise on these, because it would run for a while, and you could just quickly flip one out, or they would stack them, and you'd have a huge, like a 15, 20-inch reel, or however big they are. They're really big reels. I've seen them before. I've just never had one. And they'll just combine them, and then it can play hours at the same time on it. And it was better and easier, sounded crystal clear compared to the transcribed discs that they have, the big 16-inch records. And they're harder to keep up the players for those and all that. So anyway. $676, blank sealed ones. We've had some that, some nice Maxells and some TDKs that I could get, 100, 125 or more for one single sealed blank media tape. And that's just the case for some of these. They're worth some really good money, honestly. $676. I pulled a couple in here just to show you some varieties, but again, these do show up. You just got to know what they are. You just got to pay attention to them. All the numbers on the side, the 35-180M, that all means something. So take those all into account. Don't just think you got the right one. Compare apples to apples. Don't be comparing apples and oranges. If you've got the same number, fine. If they're different numbers or different designations or stereo, 4-track, 2-track, whatever the case may be, whatever you have, make sure they're all comparable when you're checking on prices. Here's a perfect example. This single disc, somebody spent single reel, somebody spent $638 on one. It's a huge one. It's 975 1/4 inch, 250 or 2,500 feet. Now, this is a master. This is something that they would record like studio voices on, and then they'd use that to burn, copies and stuff. 7-inch plastic. This is a 1/2 inch. That's the width, obviously. You can record them at any speed, so you won't see an IPS on here, just FYI. Just seeing if there's anything odd about this. It's a standard reel size. It's just a master. It's a specific type. It's probably the primo version of some of these. So anyway, RMG. Let's move on here. Beatles White Album. I've sold this one a couple of times, so this one always sells. Now, if somebody has a case for this one, this is a little newer one than I see. Usually they're in boxes. This is probably an import, would be my guess. Yeah, it's an import, EMI. So just keep that in mind. Just like imports on records, there's imports on these as well, too. So again, this is what you'll see. Now, if you look at the tape, you can see it's not all flush and flat. They've only played up to a certain point. The rest could be blank. I don't know on this specific one. But just keep in mind that's still good and playable. If you get into the tape, though, when it snaps really easily, the tape could be bad. Some of these could have been out in the heat and things like that, and it will break these down where they'll be trash. So check them out. You don't necessarily have to have a player. We carefully unwind some and do a tinsel test on the strength on these to make sure it doesn't snap, and the leaders on these. So anyway, this one went for $639. Here is Deep Purple again. Now this is 7.5 IPS, 7.5 inches per second stereo Dolby system. Now this is the only way you get Dolby at a certain point back then, so this is why these were so good. $665. It's just a good one. This is not a rare or scarce album, but the reel-to-reels are insanely scarce on a lot of these items. All typically the same. Warner Brothers did them one way. Other companies did them other ways. Angel and some of the other foreign or classical have different styles of reels. And, it just goes across the gambit. Again, most common, 7.5, 7.5 inches per second. Now, this is a quadraphonic. 4-track, 4 stereo. It's just the way they are. You'll run into records that are quadraphonic too, and those are always worth more. So if a standard record of whatever you find is only worth 5, a quadrophonic's probably worth 10, 15, 20 or more for a record. Now, these are horrendously scarce for some of the quadraphonic ones, at least marked that way. Some may not say quadraphonic, but will be 4-track stereo. So it just depends on the disc. Look at the markings on it. Dolby are always better too. Especially these early ones. This is probably an original from the way it looks to me. I doubt there's going to be a date on this one. Yeah, there's no date. Most of these, I don't see a date on it. But anyway, it's a real nice one here. $632, 19 bids. Now here's another one. Then this is a 15. These are more like studios and things like that. This is like the higher end collector, like a gold disc or something, like a gold CD or, something along that line. These are high quality when they're this size. They're not mounted on reels like you would normally see. This is strictly a high-end audiophile collector or a studio or like a radio station for just classical. Bruckner, now, again, Salty is very well known. You got to know something about classical. I do buy classical LPs, and I do buy, obviously, 78s. Very rarely 78 classicals, but there are some that are worth some money. There's a ton of LPs that are worth money, but almost every reel-to-reel that's classical I'll buy too. I mean, usually I can get the classicals for $1, so most people think they're trash or not worth much, but that is not the case with some. Now, these you're not going to run into these very rarely will you. I've only had a few in my life of these opened reel ones, but they always sell for a ton of money. It only takes one or two to get some really good high-end returns on your investment. But let's move on here. $585. Another one, same person, $585. This person sold like maybe $15,000 or $20,000 in just a day or so. Now, this gentleman has probably the rarest, the most advanced, biggest collection of these open-end reels, 15 IPSs that I've ever seen. It's a ton of money. Bruckner, I mean, they're just really good all the way around. So anyway, $585 again, second one. This is the same person again, $585. Open reels, just like you'd expect. Bruno Walter, Bruckner, Symphony No. 9. Again, that's a known one. I listen to classical. I listen to everything. I like rap. I like R&B. I like alternative. Classical has its days. I try to explain this to some people in the past. I've been to some orchestra presentations here in town, the Toledo Orchestra. I try to explain this to some people. Some orchestra music, people, it's just classic. I don't get into that. But if you're there in person, or you get the gist of it, like when they're just going off on, like, everybody should know, like, The Sorcerer's Apprentice or Night on Bald Mountain or something like that from Fantasia. I'll give you a good example. When it gets really hard and they're just banging on the drums and they're just blaring the music and all, it's like being at a heavy metal concert, honestly, because it just rattles and they are just going off, and they're the drummers and the flutes and everything else. It's just a horrendously cool experience. I mean, it just sends shivers down your back sometimes when it's just so loud and so out there. I mean, I just love the music like that on classical. It has to be loud for me when I'm listening to some of the classical, because I just really get into some like this. So again, know something a little bit about music. You have to enjoy music. I've said this before. I did part of my thesis for my master's on music and influence on the masses, literally. And there's a copy of it in my Facebook group if anybody ever cares to see what a master's thesis is. I literally have a copy. It's like 60 pages or something like that. It took us 3 months, almost 4 months to put together. So, you do a lot of research. I took out hundreds of books to put this thing together. But I'm into music that much that I do appreciate classical. Things I don't listen to, though, are country music. Nothing against it. There are a few songs here and there. Statler Brothers, Counting Flowers on the Wall, or some of the older ones. So Johnny Cash is cool to me. I have many. But again, he's more rockabilly. So I don't really listen to a lot of the newer country or anything like that. I don't listen to some of the foreign types of music. Nothing against it, again. It's just I just don't have an acquired taste for it. I don't listen to disco either. And then there's some scat and things like that I don't do, or ska and things like that, or any of that kind of stuff. Just not my taste. Nothing wrong with it. I've got friends who listen to all gambits of things. So again, know something about it. Get into some of this. Realize, go to if you don't like classical, spend a few minutes at a concert once, or an orchestra concert of some sort, or opera or something. There's some interesting aspects, and it honestly is heavy, like heavy metal going off on some of these. It's just incredible in person. So enough ranting on that. It's hard to get that across to people. They just blow it off as a bunch of violins going on, and that's just not the case. It's an incredible experience to be at a full orchestra presentation and just have the entire complement of musicians just going off at the same time on a heavy scene, like at the end of Night on Bald Mountain, or The Sorcerer's Apprentice, when he's just going off and all the brooms are coming down and he's waving the baton, and it's an incredible experience. That's all I can say. So anyway, $585 in this one. Another one from that same seller. Again, he sold a ton. Maybe it was even close to $20,000 if I remember. I'm not sure on the exact dollar. I did look through his just because I was really intrigued at what he had. Otto Klemperer. I'm not sure how his last name's pronounced, but Bruckner again. $585, as I said. Another $585. Dvorak. I just can't express enough how some of this music is. Watch Clockwork Orange, and you're going to see some of the effects of music on people and how they get into it and stuff like that. People have idolized, Beethoven and Mozart and stuff, and there's skill to it. It's really aggressive, and it's loud. It's heavy metal of the day. I just can't speak enough about it. But anyway, $585. Here's some more blanks. And these are studio sound recording tapes, basically. You could use these anywhere, but high quality. compare the numbers, 35-108B. All of that means something. So again, this is a case of 8. I believe it was a case. Yeah, it's a case. There's 8 in this version. There should have been 10, but there's 2 missing. No big deal. $561. Now, he could have probably put them up for $100 a piece and might have gotten some traction at that and made a little more money. But again, people like to blow it out and switch the money. It depends on your level, how much listings you have. This person doesn't have a lot of listings, so they may have needed the money right away. No complaints. That's just how business works. We had to do that when we first started. We now have the luxury to wait just because of quantity, time in, and money we have. We invest pretty much most of our money back into what we do, or store it in the bank for, if something happens to the economy. Shostakovich. Previn's well known. LP is not worth a lot, but again, we're back here. Same person, $565. Again, this guy's $20,000 out of these. He got lucky as can be. This could have made his month there, Beatles now, Abbey Road. U.S., $498 on this one here. That was, again, import one. This is a UK version of it. They're all imports. Anything you can find over in UK is usually imported over here to a certain extent. So, again, real nice one. Apple products sell all the time. Not the computer, but Apple records. Here's another one, Stravinsky. Dorati, Rite of Spring, I think this was, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Rite of Spring. Detroit Symphony. Now, I've heard them play years back when I was a child. We went for the Swan Ballet, I think it was, for Christmas. Or Nutcracker Suite. I'm sorry, I take that back. Nutcracker Suite. It was part of a music class. We were kind of required to go. But I enjoyed it, honestly, the music anyway. $475. Let's move on here. Deep Purple Quad. Quadraphonic Dolby, 7.5 inches per second. Very nice one here. Very, very nice. $449. The record itself obviously shows up, but this one here, I have Machine Head on LP right now to sell, sitting behind me right this moment. Nowhere near the price I'll get out of it as this one went for. So again, rock from the 60s, rock from the 70s, 80s stuff on reel-to-reels is scarce. Like a Depeche Mode or something would go for a ton of money. I've seen some reel-to-reels sell almost 1,000. They're very scarce to sell that high, but 600-700 is not an odd number for a reel-to-reel. Jimi Hendrix. Anybody who's a reel-to-reel collector wants a Jimi Hendrix collection, Led Zeppelin collection, Beatles collection. Those are like some of the top ones. Black Sabbath, Ozzy. All of those are high-end collectors or want those. Everybody who collects or has a reel-to-reel who's into rock, and for the most part, it's classical collectors. Again, I'll go back over it. Classical is in my group of what to buy. Rock, garage rock, of course, and soul. Those are like the key ones. Blues, if you can find them, but blues and jazz are very scarce on reel-to-reels. Some jazz was mass-produced on reel-to-reel. Mass-produced, I say it lightly, because it's not mass-produced in the sense of a record, but there's many more of them than a typical reel-to-reel on some classical. So anyway, $432, 30 bids. Here's another set of Beatles, basically the same two we had before. Maybe they relisted them, I'm not sure. Imports, $416. Either way, good lot. So let's move on here. Plastic cases I usually see are the imports. Now this is Heifetz, violin aficionado. You got to know something. I don't mind some violin. I'm not a huge fan of the single and violin solos and violin work, but it sells. It's good. I'll buy it. Nothing wrong. I've heard some very nice pieces by Heifetz, concert-wise. So anyway, $405. Another 15 IPS. Again, pure analog. That means something to a lot of people. Analog, of course, it's not digital. It's tube recorded or, transistors or whatever the case may be. But that's what people like is the analog. There's a big reason why some people collect vinyl. They like the quality of the old tube amplifying systems and players and the quality of the way it sounds. They're used to it. I get it. I don't mind if there's a few pops and crackles and things like that on a record if I'm playing it. It brings me back to the, when I was a child, and that's all you'd hear. Even on the radio, sometimes you'd hear them playing a record that had a few pops and things on it. At radio stations, because there were many radio stations that played them off record at one time. So let's move on here. 405, as I said. Linda Ronstadt. Here's a nice example, too. These are on, I think these are metal reels. Yeah, very interesting to see metal reels. Now, this is a newer one, 70s, I would say. Rather interesting. recorded and mastered an analog tape, which is what everybody wants. This is another 15 IPS tape project. This was specifically done probably 1974, so yeah, 70s. I was running the money there. There's a lot to these. I don't know every technical aspect of it. I do know which ones to look for, as you can see. $399 for these. The metal reels, just empty metal reels, you can get 15-20 bucks for on average. The bigger they are, the more they sell for. So this is a standard, probably 7-inch or 8-inch reel. There's some much bigger than that, and they always sell for a ton of money. I sell all of it, pieces, parts, lots. I don't have any reel-to-reel equipment in right now at all. Everyone sells, and I usually list if it's a player. I'll have my oldest take it apart. We'll bag the pieces, mark what they are, write the item number on it, and then we'll list them from there and sell them as parts. I rarely will ever sell a complete unit unless it's a really high, a couple $1,000 one or $800-900 one, because there's risks involved when you mail these things. You would probably almost want to make sure you only did a reel-to-reel player as a pickup local only, which are harder to sell, take you a lot longer. So parts are usually my best guess on it. I do so much better, and you'll get more for the parts, you know, as long as everything works. Most of the parts, like the motors and stuff, you can test at home. I do know how to do that, just because I've taken apart enough of them and stuff like that. But there is some risks involved when you take things apart. You could break something, ruin the value, depending on which kind you're taking apart. So know which ones. I'm not going to go into that again today, because there's so much involved in brands and styles and what's wrong with it, whether it's the belt or, you know, whatever, whether it's direct drives or whatever's wrong with it. So let's move on here. Next one here, the Doobie Brothers, Toulouse Street. Again, Dolby quad, 7.5 inches per second. Scarce. Again, all of these are scarce. If it says quad, you can add some money onto it. If it wasn't quad, maybe it wouldn't be worth as much. If it was mono, it might be worth more, depending on if the mono was the first pressing or, you know, later release of the record. So, or, you know, reel to reel in this case. A lot of this, you know, can carry over to LPs to some extent. Quadrophonic is what quad means. Some, you know, quad records are worth way more than the standard. So, again, just keep that all in mind when you're looking at these. If you can't find a price, again, pop site can be used for prices and reel to reels to some extent. Not everyone is up there that's sold, so it's going to be scarcer to find the quad or the reel to reels in general. Let's pull up some more here. 10.5 inch. So this is a little larger than most. Different set. Not numbered. This is a 15 IPS. That's the difference here. So again, these are much better quality than the standard ones. They run faster, so there's more reel there. The quality seems to be better. That's why they're worth more for the general gist of it. $393. I'm sorry on this one. $393. Tres Hombres, ZZ Top, early ZZ Top. For those of you who remember ZZ Top from the 80s, they were around in the 70s as well, too. Now, I knew it. I think Tube Snake Boogie was well before, you know, the newer ones like Legs or something like that. But ZZ Top has been a popular group for a long time. Early one, $405, 31 bids. Again, quadrophonic. This one might be an import too. Now sometimes the reels have nothing printed on where the label falls off, so you can have that happen too. Just be careful on some of these. Sometimes people will record over them, and you may not know it if you don't have a player for it. You sometimes have to take the risk. I've taken the risk before. I do have a reel-to-reel that works here. It's not a top quality one, but it was cheap, and you know, it's just a matter of replacing a few parts to get it working. So I kept it. It just sits in the back until I get some in, just so I can just pop one in and see. Some of these are auto feed too, so you don't even have to know how to load these up too. Pay attention when you do have one and you need to load it to make sure you're doing it properly too. There's plenty of YouTube videos on how to load the reel-to-reels. It's kind of like threading a sewing machine, which I do too. We do sew because I do costumes and things for Halloween for the family. And another white album. So there's 1 and 2 parts. Because this is a 7.5 inch IPS, this is what would have been bought in a typical store. The last white album I showed you would have been a special order, I would say, or studio recording, or for like a station, radio station, or something along that line. $400. Again, the prices vary by day of the week. Across the board. Some too matter if they're missing the leader. Some could be trimmed where not the entire record's there. There's other factors involved, but for the most part, I don't think I've ever found a pre-recorded one like this that I wasn't able to make a good chunk of change on. Even if the boxes are empty, I've sold the empty boxes without the reels for people who have the reels, or that will record one on their own and add it to their collection. It'll look like the real deal, but it won't be. You can reprint the labels, or people do reprint the labels off of, when they find online, and then they'll record their own on blank tape and then wind it onto this reel, or do it that way, and then they've got the box for it. So again, sometimes you can run into some fake ones. They're not necessarily fake, but they're re-recordings of the same one. That way they keep the original, and then they can pocket out the rest of it and get some money back. So anyway, that's what I have. Reel-to-reels are always worth messing with. Pay attention. If you see a bunch of records, sometimes I'll run into a couple of these mixed up in records. I've got one now I showed in a haul on Halloween, actually. I think that is actually the only one I have at this moment. I haven't listed it yet. I'll probably wait because there is a big sale coming up that has some music-related items, and I'm hoping to turn some up there. That's coming up in another month or so. So I'll hang on to the ones that I get in between now and then. But reel-to-reels are the bomb. You can see the prices on these. It's not an anomaly. These are standard prices. A lot of these go for. Most reel-to-reels are $30-40. If it was a record of most of the stuff that goes for $30-40 as a reel-to-reel, the record's probably worth a couple bucks, if even worth being able to be sold, because they're just so cheap. But reel-to-reels always sell. But that's what I have for you today. Hopefully I gave you some real good ideas on this and some motivation to look for this stuff. Well, there you go. There's another item that I have made literally thousands upon thousands of dollars on. Every time I get a chance to pick some up, whether they're blank, whether they're recorded, new, used, open, whatever the case may be, I try and hop on them. But that's what I have for you today. Hopefully that gave you some ideas and some thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button down below. You can also hit the bell icon to be notified when I post new content or go live. Subscribe and tell a friend.